Rightio, today we're going to be sharing some thoughts on the Brooks Hyperion Max 3, which I would say is one of my riskier purchases of this year, basing it off the hatred that I had for the Hyperion Max 2. Felt like that shoe was clunky and dead and just completely uninspiring underfoot, completely overpriced as well for an EVA trainer. So coming back around for a second round, this time in 2025, I'm putting a lot of faith in the spec sheets here, hoping that it's come through all right. Going to run you through my experience, whether it's matched up to my expectations, chatting through the price point, getting into some comparisons as well. Going to let you know everything about this shoe and what to expect if you pick it up. In terms of some quick specs, we're looking at 44mm of foam here in the heel with a 6mm drop down to 38 in the forefoot. Dual layer midsole with a top layer of DNA gold, which is a PEBA foam, a little bit more of a resilient compound as well, not super squishy. On the bottom we have a nitrogen infused EVA DNA Flash V2, which I would also say has been tuned to be a bit softer than what we've expected from Brooks shoes in the past, certainly softer than what we got in the Hyperion Max 2. In between these two layers we have a plastic Speedvault plate, which I would suppose is meant to add a little bit of extra stiffness to this midsole. It does fork into the forefoot, so they're not trying to make it super duper stiff, but the shoe does still come across as a very rigid, almost tank of a shoe, I would say. There's not a lot of bend to that plate. Even once you warm it up, it does flex up a little bit, but still very stiff, very controlled, very kind of unbendable. In terms of the weight, it is coming in pretty heavy. 309 grams for my men's size 10.5 is hefty these days. It definitely does take it out of that kind of contention for top all-rounder super trainer like a Mega Blast or Evo SL or Qiaodan from Dynafish. It's just in a bit of a different category, but that doesn't stop it from being useful in a couple of different runs in my week, which we will chat about soon. In terms of the upper, it's pretty complicated. There's a fair bit going on, almost a little bit too much for my liking. We've got a pretty stiff reinforced heel counter, plenty of padding back there which softens it out. You can see this knit overlay wraps around the ankle collar, continues down into the tongue, which is the kind of centerpiece of the upper, I would say. Not sure whether I like it or not. It's quite a thick, stiff, sweaty piece of upper material, which restricts the foot quite nicely, keeps it really locked down on the midsole, but it's almost a little bit overbearing sometimes, and it does make me wonder why we would then need a really stiff eyelet chain wrapping over the top. It almost feels like they've double dipped on upper material when they could have got away with something a little bit more simple, I would say. The lockdown is definitely very secure with the stiff heel counter, the kind of stretchiness of this tongue, and then the reinforced eyelet chain on both sides. It does make it very easy to find a secure fit and stay exactly where you want to. But if you do want to relax it back out, there isn't really that option. Even if you undo the laces all the way, you've still got this pretty tight feeling over the top of the foot with this knit part, and it is a little bit sweaty, a little bit too thick for my liking. I do think we could have got away with a fair bit less material, probably could have saved some weight as well. I don't think that this is going to work for wide footers either. I just don't think that you can really expand the upper as much as you should be able to. And for Brooks, which is a brand which a lot of people associate with being more roomy, more kind of accommodating, that could be a little bit of an issue. The upper mesh in the forefoot is pretty similar. It's a little bit thicker than I would probably expect to see on a super trainer. Sure, it does keep you contained in the midsole, but it's just unnecessarily thick. I would say we could trim things up pretty easily and drop 20, 25 grams without changing the lockdown a whole lot. The actual fit and shaping, I've gone true to size 10.5 here, which works for all other Brooks shoes and most Western brands as well. I would say I have a decent amount of room ahead of the toes. There is a little bit of a kind of tapering in through the toe box. Definitely not as roomy as some Brooks models, but it's not a super duper sharp super trainer. I think it's probably average, but I'm not going to say wider foot friendly. This is definitely standard fit. Don't come expecting any extra room. Overall, I would say that this is a decent enough upper. I mean, it does its job in keeping you on the platform, but it is a bit hot. It is a bit sweaty, bit overbearing. I think we could trim things down and make it a little bit more friendly, a little bit more light-hearted, and I think that would improve the overall sensation of the shoe. But I will chat about it in the ride. I do think there is elements that I can enjoy. So overall, I'm not displeased, but there is things that I would change. In terms of the ride of this shoe, this is an absolute tank. We've got this big, deep, dense sensation underfoot, the two layers of more resilient foam with a very stiff rocker combined to give a really nice gently propulsive ride with a kind of rubbery rebound, which you just can't find the bottom of no matter how hard you try. You can punch into the ground with as much force as you like, and it all just kind of gets absorbed and redirected into a nice kind of forward pop, which turns over quite nicely. Sure, it's not super versatile because of the weight and the extra stack height. I'm not going to be ripping anything much faster than marathon pace in this one, and even then marathon pace almost feels like a bit of a novelty. I'm just kind of pushing up to that pace because I know the bounce is pretty fun, but in terms of the amount of effort that it takes to get the shoe moving, it's not quite worth it in my mind. So this for me is not even a long run shoe. It is just kind of that super trainer that I chuck on for an hour easy when the legs are a bit beaten up, or if I'm just going for a run with mates and I want something that's just going to keep me feeling fresh. This is the kind of shoe that I chuck on. Is that a little bit spoiled? Absolutely, and I will chat about that in the price point. Do we need a shoe like this if it doesn't have that kind of inherent versatility of other super trainers? It's going to be up for discussion. For me, this is kind of suited one run in my week, and I've had a pretty good time in it. It's smooth, it's structured, it's very, very protective. I found it to be pretty stable as well. As someone who lands on the outside edge of my shoe, I don't find that this midfoot cutout really affects me a whole lot, and with the kind of stiffness of the upper, the lockdown that brings, and a fairly decent midsole platform considering the stack height, more resilient foams, I think it comes across quite nicely. Thing that I really notice is that it doesn't feel too clumpy at slower paces, which is a little bit unusual for a shoe which is so stiff with such a prominent rocker. I found that this feels quite similar to shoes like the Adidas Prime X. The original was one of my favorite shoes of all time, but it does just feel a little bit friendlier at slower paces, maybe with a bit more of a prominent rocker, probably the fact that it's a bit more stable as well. I do think that this is a pretty good contender in that kind of big, tall, deeply cushioned, kind of gutsy rebound kind of shoe. Like the Prime X, I think, is a really good example of one. Superblast is kind of doing a little bit of it, but this does have that kind of more meaty feel to it. The Superblast is definitely great, but it does feel sometimes like a bit of a kind of shell, like it's a little bit empty underfoot. You get a bit of a pop, but there's not this kind of deep sensation of compression rebound. This does have that. It feels a little bit more alive, a little bit more engaging, which I have really appreciated. Sure, not as fast as the Superblast, but in terms of the sensation of cushioning, I do think it does make up for at least a little bit of that deficit. So for myself, this has been a nice kind of easy recovery, keep the legs fresh, no worries super trainer, something that I can just chuck on when I'm not really sure how the run's going to go, which is a bit of a spoiled position, but for a lot of people I see this being a really nice protective long run shoe, something for some tempo zones, maybe some marathon workouts if you're starting to put a bit more Ks into your sessions. I think it can work quite nicely there. Or if you're just someone who likes a really big level of protection in your daily training, maybe you're a heavier bloke and you need a bit more guts underfoot, something that's really going to hold up to a good deal of compression and force through the midsole, I think it'll do a really nice job there. And I think the overall durability of this foam setup should be pretty good as well. So if you just want a shoe which is going to last a little bit longer because of the amount of stack and the amount of shoe that you're getting, this could be something to look at as well. Sure, it's not going to be the most competitive super trainer around with the weight and the bit of extra bulk. It does feel like a bit of a novelty pushing up into those kind of faster paces, a bit too heavy to really sustain it, not really worth the energy input. But overall, for the runs that I have used it for, can't lie, I've actually had a really good time. I do think this is one that I will hold on to for a little bit longer because I do genuinely just want to use it in my daily, weekly rotation rather. In terms of the outsole, we've got a pretty decent coverage here of some pretty sticky, grippy rubber up in the forefoot, 2 thick pads in the heel. Exposed nitro EVA, I'm not concerned about at all. That stuff is pretty durable. I expect it to hold up pretty nicely. We do have these 2 little cavities up in the forefoot. Maybe they could capture some gravel. Haven't had any issues myself so far. I think the grip's good. Wet weather performance I did get to test out and that held up just fine. I think the durability should be pretty good as long as you don't absolutely mash the heel. Maybe you could peel up one of these heel segments, but for myself, getting kind of front half of the shoe, didn't really notice much at all. Pretty decent here. I do think the overall durability of this shoe is going to be pretty decent. For myself, I'm expecting, 700, 800, even more Ks from this midsole compared to, Nova Blast 5, which I think would die out by about 500. I do think it's got a bit more guts to it. So overall, pretty happy with what's going on here on the outsole. Coming around to the price point, it is a bit of a spoiler in this case. I think it's one of the main problems with this shoe. I think it's a bit much. 320 bucks for a shoe which I don't think has the best level of versatility, has that extra bulk, a little bit of a finicky upper. I think it's pretty hard to argue for this one when you've got the Super Blast sitting alongside it, Mega Blast not far ahead, Neo Vista 2 from Mizuno, which is always on discount because no one respects Mizuno as much as they should. There's just a lot of shoes out there which I think can offer something which is at least somewhat similar to what the Hyperion Max can do, with the added benefit of either a bit of extra kind of softness and smoothness or a little bit of extra rebound at a lighter weight. It's pretty tough for me. This is a shoe which I can highly recommend on discount. 250, 260, then you've got a banger of a trainer, fantastic long run cruiser, save the legs for daily training, or if you just like a more protective speed shoe, this can still do the job quite nicely. At that kind of range, 260, 270, I'd be pretty happy to see it go, but 320. At the end of the day, it isn't anything that we haven't really seen before. Top layer of paper foam, plastic plate, EVA foam on the bottom. It's not revolutionizing the Super Trainer game other than adding an extra 4mm stack on its competition. So for me, probably a little bit overs for now, but pick it up on discount and I think we're all happy. In terms of some competitors, I would say the Prime X Original from Adidas is probably the most similar in feel to me, in terms of that kind of gutsy, never-ending rebound, the kind of big, tall feeling, but this does feel a bit more structured, a bit more stable, a bit more rocketed, which I think feels better at a slightly bigger variety of paces. The Prime X for me was a shoe which I had to kind of step on the pace a bit more to kind of keep it transitioning. If I sat back on it, I almost broke my ankle, so that is something to note there. I think if you enjoy the Prime X, you will get along with this shoe, if with a little bit of extra weight, but I do think it is channeling that kind of big, tall, kind of protective feel quite nicely. Compared to the Super Blast 2, this is a fair bit more kind of dense and rubbery in its rebound, whereas the Super Blast is a bit more poppy and immediate with that Piba foam. Super Blast is more stable with a broader base, a bit more surface area underfoot. This does feel a little bit more assistive to me. I feel like you get more rockering, a little bit more sink into the foam, and a bit more of a kind of rubbery rebound from it, which I do enjoy, but I do think the Super Blast has better versatility with a lighter weight, bit of a poppier feel, and I think most people for $320 will probably go for the Super Blast 2, although I would say that I do enjoy this a bit more for my kind of recovery run paces. The runs that I've enjoyed this shoe for, I enjoy more than the Super Blast 2, so there is that. It's not a kind of complete domination. There is a run in the week when the legs are feeling a bit sore where I do prefer the Hyperion Max 3. Compared to the Mega Blast, pretty similar feedback. This is a bit poppier, a bit more stable with a broader base, lighter, more aggressive. The upper here is atrocious though, so I'll probably give that to the Hyperion Max 3. I would just say if you prefer a little bit more rockering through the forefoot, you might lean towards the Hyperion Max 3, but otherwise, Mega Blast I do still think is probably a better recommendation. Final shoe is the qiaodan leili plaid, which is a dual density super trainer, top layer of TPEE, bottom layer of supercritical EVA, carbon plate in there to add a bit of extra stiffness. The contrast between the two foams here is quite prominent. You really do notice the very compressive foam up top with the extremely firm foam underneath. Gives you this kind of sink in with the depth of protection at the bottom. Whereas the foams here, honestly, if you gave this to the average person, I don't think they'd be able to tell the difference between the Piba and the Nitro EVA. And so I think that the overall feeling of the midsole is a bit more fluent, but it maybe doesn't have that kind of nice step-in softness that the TG Plaid does. For the price points, this is definitely better value, but I do think that I prefer the Hyperion Max 3 for a bit more of a kind of smooth transition and maybe a little bit more of a kind of gutsy rebound, whereas I do think I lose a bit of energy in the softness of this TPEE foam. So overall for me, the Brooks Hyperion Max 3 has been a bit of a personal success, but maybe not a shoe I can openly recommend to absolutely everybody. I do think it is a bit bulky, maybe doesn't have the versatility to really compete with the super trainers that some people would expect. I would recommend this for people who want a nice, dense, protective ride, maybe have a bit more weight behind them, want something which is going to really hold out. But otherwise, I do think there are better options out there which just are a better kind of addition to the super trainer market. If I was going to make improvements, I would trim down the upper, keep it a bit lighter, a bit more airy and breathable. I might also trim down the midsole. I don't think we need all 44mm here when the foam compounds themselves are quite protective. I think we could go down to 40mm and still have a decent level of protection there. That way we could have something which is both lighter and more agile, but also a little bit more stable underfoot, which I think would bring a few more people in. Lower the price point to 300, I think we would have a really competitive option, but right now, things just aren't quite falling into place to be able to recommend it freely. but this is definitely a shoe which I will personally enjoy in the coming months as well. Decent enough from Brooks. It's good to see some improvements, bringing in some new technology, but I do still think we need a little bit of extra work to bring it to the kind of competitive super trainer market.